Welcome to Monday with McCove for May 13th, 2019. Been doing these for a couple months. It's kind of crazy. If you jump on, let me know that you're here, and you can always ask questions, give me comments. Always helps me to know what's connecting and what's not. My topic today is about calling, and why is knowing your calling a key to living a transformed life? Why is it important to see yourself as part of a bigger picture and that your life matters for more than just you and your family? So I'm McCove Johnson. I'm the Spirit-Led Mom Coach, and I empower Christian moms to empower and equip with tools and encouragement to improve your relationship with God and with yourself, so that you can improve your relationship with others, especially your children and your husband. So calling, I think that is one of those things that has become Christianese, and it doesn't really mean anything anymore. One of those things is when we hear calling, we think of like Billy Graham was called to be an evangelist to America, or Joyce Meyer is called to international speaking ministry. And so we go, I'm not that, and I'm not them, so I don't have a calling. Or I don't know what my calling is because it's not like identifiable as a vocation or a title or whatever. And I think that is sad, because I don't think that's what God ever intended when he called us. And so I believe that knowing that you are called is far more important than knowing specifically what you are called to. So what I mean by that is knowing you're called, because everyone who follows Christ is called. We have been called to a ministry of reconciliation. We're working to reconcile ourselves to God, but we're also have the ministry of reconciliation of bringing that message of the good news that anybody out there, can be reconciled to God also. We are all called to that. And that's going to manifest differently in everyone's life, which I think is amazing and something that needs to be broken in the typical American church. Because again, we tend to have an idea that if this is what we're called to, then here's the ABC pattern of what that has to look like to be walking that out. And it's not true. God is incredibly creative, and so more than like lots of us can be following the same call and have it look completely different. And that's okay, as long as we're following the Father, because he called us to follow him, to follow Christ, not to follow a doctrine, not to follow a tradition. So we're called to reconciliation. We're called to sharing the gospel. We're called to making disciples. Making disciples is not making converts. We aren't called to make converts. We aren't called to get somebody to confess and say a prayer. We are called to make disciples. And that idea of discipling is training and walking alongside and correcting and investing in that life, kind of like an apprenticeship program of like they're with you and they're shadowing you and they're learning how to do whatever it is you're teaching them, whether it's a trade or whether it's living your faith. That it's this partnership, you're doing it with them, you're discipling them and teaching them how to live by how you live, not by putting them in a class or a program. Those things are useful, they have their place. Obviously, I'm creating classes and courses and things, but they're not enough. To be truly discipled, there has to be relationship, so that when what's taught in the class or what's taught in the principle isn't working, there's somebody there to come back to and be like, what am I missing? Why is this not working for me? And that's actually one of my biggest passions, because for years I would do what the book said, what the teaching said, and it just didn't work. It was not getting the results that they were promising. I was not seeing the transformation and the breakthrough. But I didn't have a relationship and I didn't have the skills. So those two things, to be able to go back and say, why is this not working? Because if I went to someone and it's not working, it was just like, well, just, kind of the way it is sometimes, or maybe nobody ever told me I was a whiner, but I always felt like I was a whiner, and like other people thought I was a whiner. Like, just stop complaining, just get over it. And it was because I didn't have the right tools, or I was trying to use the right tools, given a new tool, but I didn't know how to apply it. And so, kind of getting off track, but that's part of making disciples. There has to be that relationship piece. So when a tool is not working, we don't just condemn the person or ourselves that, like, well, I don't know, you're just missing it. Like, it worked for me. But to be like, okay, why isn't it working? Are you not using it right? Are you misunderstanding somehow? Is there still some kind of wound? Or, I mean, there's just all kinds of things. But to have that relationship with somebody who will go through that with you, or that you will go through it with who you are discipling, so that they can have breakthrough and continue on. Another thing that we are all called to is knowing and following the voice of the shepherd. Where Jesus says, my sheep know my voice and they follow me. We're all called to that. So you are called. And chances are you have, I don't know, what we would call a bigger calling, but that's really insignificant, because God kind of has an upside down kingdom. So in faithfully making disciples and carrying out that ministry of reconciliation and knowing his voice and following him, if there is what we often think of as a bigger calling out there, that will get you there. So instead of putting out, this is where God wants to get me, and I am working and striving and everything goes towards that, not really. Like, if he has given you that, then yes, you can be intentional in, if he's shown you that you're going to be a writer, then, maybe you practice writing, maybe you take some classes. But it's just as likely that he could prompt you to start writing without having told you that there's something bigger out there that you're going to use that for someday. I think that's part of the faith process, that those things that he prompts you to do that may or may not seem to make sense in your season could just be because he's preparing you for what's out there. And those small faithful steps in following is where the real impact is made. That discipling, that building that foundation of faithfulness, of listening when he says, and they'll lead to a larger platform if they're meant to. And we don't need to worry about it. I know I kind of look at my own, like, I have a sense that I'm called to something bigger than being a stay-at-home mom and a blogger, but I don't know exactly what that looks like. But in the meantime, I just keep being faithful. And so that has led me to, okay, well, maybe I should create an online course. And so I created Transformational Quiet Times. And then that led me to, well, I'd really like to coach with people on this. If they're just learning how to hear God's voice, I would love to coach them through that and to answer their questions and encourage them and let them know that they're on the right track and they really can hear from him and he wants to talk to them. And so it's just been, well, I'm doing this and now it seems like I should do that. And I don't have to worry about what the big picture out there is someday. And it's actually probably better if I don't, because then I can work on that someday stuff instead of working on the right now stuff. And the right now stuff is being disciplined with my time so that I'm not distracted from my family, being disciplined with my income so that I'm being a good steward of what he's given me to show that I am indeed faithful and capable of handling the more that I believe is coming. And being focused on those now steps is far more important to what he's taking me to than for me to try in my limited imagination to prepare for whatever that might be, because I don't even know. So if we get wrapped up into that calling out there, we're missing, or we can miss the steps right here that we know for sure we are called to. But we can rest in knowing that if we're faithful with what we know we're called to right here, washing dishes, cooking meals, changing diapers, reading stories, all those things, if he's given you children, if he's given you a family, even just taking care of yourself, like, you are called to that. And being faithful with that is important. And as an example of that, like being faithful with my own growth, I have teens now, so I have the benefit of seeing. Oh, thank you, Jessica. Focusing on the now steps. Yes, it's so important. And so I am at a stage where I'm starting to reap the benefits of that with my teens, because I can see where they have a voice that I didn't have at their age, where they have so much better boundaries than I had at their age, that they know how to hear God's voice. I didn't even know it was possible to hear God's voice at their age. That we can invite them in as a family and sit down and be like, we need to pray through this. What is the Lord speaking to you about this? And we can have those conversations. So that's the result of me being faithful in a now step when they were far younger, probably 15 years ago, that I started saying, okay, I believe that God wants to talk to us. And so we're going to practice. We're going to spend time learning to hear from him. And did I think 15 years ago that that was going to lead me to create a course to teach people to listen to God's voice? No, I was just being faithful in the now. That was what I needed. That's what my kids needed. And I didn't have time to create a course or to do, I had 3 kids less than 3 years apart. But he's faithful to use those things and to teach. And another example that he brought to mind, and I was going to look up details on this and I forgot, but the first woman that came to mind is Susanna Wesley. And she had 14 or 17 kids, whole bunch, long time ago, when there was no washing machines and no refrigeration, and like a whole different world than we live in. And because we talk now about not being able to have quiet time or not being able to do the things that we want to do. And she, in the midst of all of her kids and all of her responsibilities, would, I think, like, pull her apron over her head, and that was her prayer room. Like, the kids knew she's talking to God, leave her alone. And she trained them to that. And that's part of that discipling. Like, we can train our children to honor our boundaries and to honor their own boundaries. And so she did that. And what she modeled for her kids of having time with God being a priority led to at least 2 of her sons, Charles and, what's the other one's name now? Really forgetting. There was 2 of them, Charles and John Wesley. They led a nationwide, actually, like, spread across Europe, revival because of her faithfulness to honor her relationship with God and be faithful in that, in the midst of everything she had going on. So you have a calling, and it's to live out your faith before everyone around you. Most importantly, your kids, if you have kids at home. But the people at the grocery store, the people at your job, the people in your neighborhood, that living your life in a way that they see Jesus, and that they want to know how it is that you can have joy and peace in hard times and dealing with hard people and all of that. Like, that is your calling, and it matters. And if you happen to have a very clear understanding that you're called to something else, like you're called to a job, you're called to a business, you're called to start a ministry, that's great. And he will lead you just as faithfully in that. And that is important too, but it's not more important than staying faithful in these small, consistent things. So just hope that makes sense. If there's any thoughts or questions, I'll hang on a minute, see if they don't always show up right away. Doesn't look like it. So I am McCove Johnson signing off for Mondays with McCove, and I would love feedback on what I talked about today, but also if there's other things you would like to talk to me about, I would love to answer questions. If you're watching this on the replay, let me know, ask questions. I'll get back to those too. And I'm probably going to move this up some for summer. So if you have any feedback on the time, I'll look at that too, but probably move it up till 11:30 for summer. And just hope you guys have an awesome day. I will put a link if you want to talk to me about coaching or want more information about the Transformational Quiet Times course. I'll put a link for that on there too. And I hope you guys have a great week.